Yo, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I'm your host, JT. So, I was watching Thursday night football last night between the Cowboys and the Giants before the hurricane knocked out my power. And my biggest takeaway from that game is that I don't believe Brian DaBoll is the problem. There's a lot of noise calling for him to get fired after this season and him to get the pink slip along with Daniel Jones. But firing Brian DaBoll is a really bad decision because he is a really good coach. And you can be a good coach but unable to win because you're held back by your quarterback. So in this episode, I want to explain why Brian DaBoll shouldn't get fired. And college football has a new epidemic going on created by the new era of the transfer portal and NIL. I'm going to give my thoughts on that as well. Before you dive into it, real quick, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Make sure that you follow us on Instagram at JT_Sports_ and on X at JT_Sports__. Remember, we are not just a YouTube channel. We are a podcast. You can find this episode and all of our previous ones on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcasts from. The JT Sports Podcast is available. So let's dive into it. The New York Giants lost to the Dallas Cowboys on Thursday Night Football. They fall to 1-3 on the season. There's a lot of chatter around head coach Brian DaBoll's future and his job security. If you're the Giants, it would be in your best interest not to fire Brian DaBoll because he's a pretty good coach. He gets the most out of his personnel. You see how good Malik Neighbors has been early into his career. Wendell Robinson has been really good as well. You got a really good tight end in Bellinger. The only thing holding back this team from making it into the playoffs is that you don't have good enough quarterback play from Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones, he played decent against the Cowboys, but having decent quarterback play only gets you so far in today's age of the NFL. And remember, Brian DaBoll inherited Daniel Jones. He didn't draft him. He didn't sign him in free agency. Hell, he wasn't really on board with the idea of re-signing Daniel Jones to that awful contract that he has right now. And he took Daniel Jones along with the rest of this team to the playoffs in his first season coaching the Giants. So if you can get Daniel Jones to the postseason, win a playoff game with him, with Isaiah Hodgins being your best receiver at that time, you're a pretty good coach. Last year, you dealt with a boatload of injuries. Daniel Jones regressed. This season, Daniel Jones has played better due to the improvement of the offensive line, and you give him a few more weapons to throw the ball to, but he still isn't cutting it. And just because you're a good offensive mind doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be able to succeed with every quarterback that you had. People like to call Kyle Shanahan a quarterback guru, a quarterback whisperer, because you can plug any QB into his system and they automatically have success. But there's been plenty of quarterbacks that Kyle Shanahan has coached that have not panned out. Nick Mullins, CJ Beathard. Even if you are a brilliant offensive mind, every quarterback that you touch is not going to turn into gold. Brian DaBoll deserves the opportunity to be able to draft his own quarterback and develop him. He was an instrumental part in Josh Allen's development when he was the OC for the Buffalo Bills. If you have the opportunity to develop a quarterback, the Giants have a better chance of being able to succeed with Brian DaBoll being the head coach as they do with him running it back with Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones just isn't it. He's a low-end starter. He's a good bridge quarterback. If you got a rookie QB that you draft and you don't want to start him day one, Daniel Jones could be a good guy to let him sit behind for a few games until he's ready to take over. Or if you just need a quality backup, Daniel Jones can serve in that capacity as well, but he's not a high-end quarterback that's going to help elevate your team to a lot of wins. He's somebody that only benefits by having a great situation around him and sensational play calling. And as good as what DaBoll is, he's no Kyle Shanahan or Sean McVay. So when you give him a quarterback like Daniel Jones, you're handicapping him. Imagine if the Giants could get their hands on Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, or Carson Beck, or any of the other high-end quarterbacks coming out in next year's draft class. This franchise will be in a better situation with the new signal caller than what they are with a guy in Daniel Jones that, even with him playing one of his better games against the Cowboys, he still had about 3-4 key overthrows in that game that costed the New York Giants. And when you're in these one-possession games, you have no choice but to be conservative on fourth down and just go for field goals, take the points instead of trying to roll the dice and be aggressive, because you don't have a quarterback who you can trust to make those plays on those crucial fourth down situations. Brian DaBoll has done a great job of getting the most out of Daniel Jones, but he doesn't really have any more juice left to squeeze out of him. And at this point, the Giants have already had a carousel of head coaches that they've been through ever since they fired Tom Coughlin. You're not going to go anywhere rehiring a different head coach. Unless it's Bill Belichick, there's no reason to fire Brian DaBoll. If he can get Daniel Jones to the playoffs, imagine what he can be able to do if he actually has the ability to draft and develop the quarterback of his choosing. Maybe Joe Schoen needs to go. I don't think that he's a good general manager, but there are a few draft picks that he's made that have worked out in the Giants' favor. But Brian DaBoll isn't the problem in the Big Apple. The problem is that your team isn't great and you're not getting high-level quarterback play from a dude that you invested a first-round pick into years ago. This wasn't Brian DaBoll's quarterback. He inherited this dude, and he's done all he has been able to when it comes to getting the most out of Danny Dimes. And one of those guys needs to go. Daniel Jones should be the dude getting that pink slip, not Brian DaBoll. Because if he ends up being available on the coaching market, there has to be a little bit of interest that he is going to receive from a couple of franchises out there that are looking for an offensive-minded coach who can help transform their franchise. And if he gets opportunity to draft a quarterback, I like his chances being able to succeed wherever he goes if he does get fired by the Giants, because he has shown more than enough that he's capable of being a quality head coach in this league. And if you can give him a good quarterback or allow him to draft and develop one, I like his chances being able to work out in New York. The new era of the NIL and the transfer portal in college football has caused the epidemic in this sport. A few years ago, we were all taken by surprise when players started opting out of bowl games to protect their draft status. Well, now players are deciding to quit on their teams mid-season to redshirt so they can hit the transfer portal if they're not getting good enough playing time. And the problem with this is that when you have players that opt out mid-season, that team loses quality depth. And you already, if you're a head coach, you don't know who's on your team when you enter spring ball. Even when you go into fall camp, you don't know who really is going to last and who's going to decide to have a change of heart, decide just to transfer before the season starts. So now you got to worry about how many guys you're going to have on your squad before the season starts, who's going to stay. And then the season kicks off, and now you got to fight to keep guys from quitting on you in the middle of the season if they're not getting any legitimate playing time. And as a player, you can understand the reasoning for deciding to use a redshirt year if you're not playing, because if I'm not getting any action, what's the use of me using up a extra year eligibility when I can maintain eligibility and give myself a good chance of playing next year for a different squad as long as I don't have to play any more games this year. And the problem with that is it's a bad precedent to set for other teams out there. Because if you're willing to quit on this team because you're not starting, what makes any other program think that you want to do the same to them? You see, with the transfer portal and NIL now, all these players are just looking for opportunities. They're not looking to get developed. If they're not starting their first season, they quit. And college football used to be so different because when you used to recruit guys, it was all about staying 2 or 3 years, staying through with the grind, and being willing to be developed and accepting your role. You're only one injury away from getting playing time if you're a guy like Bear Alexander, who just decided to redshirt this season after transferring from Georgia to USC a few years ago. And he hasn't really done too much. He's been incredibly overhyped. I thought that he was one of the better interior defensive linemen in the country, but if you transfer out of Georgia, there definitely is some huge red flags around you because it's hard to find good interior defensive linemen in today's age of college football. And Georgia produces better defensive tackles than the majority of teams in the nation, not named Michigan. So if you can't start at Georgia and you got to transfer, maybe you're just not that good. But when you go to these teams and you're just there looking for an opportunity to start, and if you don't get the job, you end up just quitting on the squad, it hurts the team because now you don't have depth at that position. Even if you didn't plan on starting a guy, you may have viewed him as a good rotational piece. But guys don't want to be rotational pieces anymore. They want to get all of the action, and if they can't do that, they're just going to throw or wave the white flag on the season, redshirt, and bounce around until they can get another opportunity to start, which pretty much they want handed to them. Nobody wants to work anymore. Nobody wants to compete. Nobody wants to put any blood, sweat, and tears into the programs that they play for anymore. Everybody's just looking for handouts. Who's going to give me the most NIL money without me having to earn it on the field? Who's automatically going to allow me to become a starter without me proving myself and earning the starting job? It's just gimme, gimme, gimme in today's age of college football. And when we went to war, us as fans, for these players being able to make money off their name, image, and likeness, nobody expected for college football to become this. They're not even doing this in the NFL. If you get signed by the Philadelphia Eagles and you're not starting, you just can't say, hey, I'm quitting on the team. You can either say, cut me, and you lose your salary, and maybe another team picks you up in free agency, but nobody just says, you know what, I'm not about to suit up for another game on this team if they're not going to start me. That doesn't happen in the NFL, so it shouldn't be allowed to happen in college football. Even if you are a senior and this is your final year, you decided to make the decision to transfer to this squad, so therefore you shall honor your commitment. But if you don't play in 4 games, and you've been on the squad for 12 games, you should be able to redshirt, maintain your eligibility if you didn't play a certain amount of snaps, and transfer to another program. But that's only if you play through the entirety of the season. Even if you don't start, if you're just on the team, you're traveling around and you're not playing, and you only appear in less than 4 games, then that should give you the ability to redshirt. But you shouldn't be able to redshirt just because you're not starting. You're deciding that I'm going to make a business decision. I'm going to just quit on the team, hit the portal once the season ends, and look for another opportunity elsewhere. It's ruining the sport of college football. I was all for a player movement, having the players given the ability to transfer whenever they want to, but not to just transfer mid-season and just decide that they're going to quit on their team because they're not getting paid what they were expected to in NIL. And I'm not talking about the UNLV QB situation, because I agree with him. If you promise me a certain amount to play for you and you don't give it to me, why should I suit up for your program for another game. You just flat out lied to me. I'm talking about you agreed to an NIL package, but yet mid-season, you decide you want to renegotiate and you're going to sit out if they don't meet your demands. That's the problem of today's age in college football. There is no supervision over the transfer portal and the NIL. Nobody has any rules or regulations for this thing. And it pretty much has turned this sport into the wild, wild west when players just have so much power that they can hurt a team due to losing key depth. And it's a domino effect. I saw one guy decide to redshirt and quit on his team, and everybody else has followed suit. It's becoming a new trend in college football. And now teams are going to lose a third of their roster, have no depth at all because of this. And if the NCAA can't find any ways to regulate this, find a way to get the control back to the universities instead of the players, college football is going to continue to go downhill with all these changes that they've made to the transfer portal, NIL, expanding the college football playoffs. All it has done is make this sport worse. The sport was better with the BCS era. Every change that they've made has not been for the betterment of college football. Having players having the ability to transfer is one thing, but allowing them to just quit on the team middle of the season, lose an important depth piece in case a guy gets injured, is bad for this sport, and it's not heading in a good direction. So this is it for this episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. If you enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, give us a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, and Amazon. Share the pod with your friends, family members, and acquaintances. Give us a follow on Instagram at JTSports_ and on X at JTSports__. And I'll see you guys shortly with another episode of the JT Sports Podcast.